morning. The special meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on Gang Violence and Youth Development will now come to order. Out of respect for the presenters on item number 4, we will move to item number 4 first.
Item number 4, communication from the mayor and city administrative officer relative to notification of submission of an application for and acceptance of a grant award in the amount of $184,649 from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation for fiscal year 2008-09 Juvenile Accountability Block Grant Program. On September 22, 2008, the Public Safety Committee approved the recommendations as contained in the CAO report and communication from the mayor.
Good morning, Melissa Fleming with the CAO. As stated, the Mayor's Office is requesting authority to accept a grant award totaling $184,000 for the Juvenile Accountability Block Grant Program. The award period is July 1, 2008 through June 30, 2009, and the bulk of the award will be used to support the Community Law Enforcement and Recovery Site in the Ramona Gardens Hollenbeck Gang Reduction and Youth Development Zone. The grant does require a 10% match, which the Mayor's Office is proposing to provide from their contractual services account.
Okay, what level of government is this grant coming from?
The appropriation for the grant comes from the federal government and is given to the state, who then divides it among the different entities in the state.
So it's from the state.
So, correct. The actual grant will be from the state.
And when you're referring to the Ramona Gardens, you're talking about the grid zone in Ramona Gardens? The gang reduction zone?
That's correct.
Okay. In addition to that, a year ago, the city approved the acceptance of a grant from the Governor's Office of Emergency Services relative to an earmark for Council District 14. Will the funds of the earmark by the Speaker's office be used for Ramona Gardens and or Boyle Heights?
I'm not sure I'm familiar with that specific earmark, Councilman, so...
Yes, Speaker Fabian Nunez put together an earmark, approximately $1 million or so, in not the budget that just got signed, but the one before. And I was just, it's my understanding that the way that they wrote the legislation, that it was supposed to be used in the 14th Council District. The CalGrip, it came from that source, but it wasn't part of the competitive grants. It was an earmark.
What I can do is go back and confirm that we are using it for that site.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to say on this item?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. Is there anybody here to speak on item number 4 to this committee? We are now on item number 4. Seeing and hearing none, no one coming forth to speak on public comment on item number 4. Public comment on item number 4 is closed. With that, this committee will concur with the September 22nd, 2008 action of the Public Safety Committee to approve the CAO recommendations. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Who's ready? Which items are ready? Presenters. Everybody's good? Okay. All right. We'll now go to item number 1.
Item number 1, continued from June 26, 2008. Motion, Alarcon Cardenas, relative to receiving public input in regard to potential gang injunctions, requesting the city attorney to review the process for receiving public input from neighborhood councils for gang injunctions and related matters.
Okay. We are now on item number 1, which entails the Alarcon Cardenas motion relative to the receiving of public input regarding potential gang injunctions.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Councilmember. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Bruce Reardon, representing the City Attorney's Office. I'm the Director for the Anti-Gang Operations for the City Attorney's Office. With me at the witness table is on my left Ann Tremblay, on my right Arturo Martinez. They are both supervisors with the City Attorney's Office. For Ann Tremblay in the Gang Division, for Mr. Martinez, he wears 2 hats, both in the Gang Division and the Safe Neighborhoods Division, and both have a great deal of experience on the subject and have worked together with me and your staff as well over the past months and even year on issues involving the removal petition as well as the updating and really I go so far as saying, I say this without fear of rebuke, revolutionizing our use of the website so that we can make the website more in keeping with the vision that you expressed a year ago, which is a website that gets to people information they need, which wasn't happening a year ago.
Okay, thank you. So, in what fashion does the city attorney's office receive and/or educate communities about gang injunctions prior to the implementation of a gang injunction?
Let me just get my my notes out, if I may. I may have to borrow this. Bear with me as I'm just organizing my materials, but one material I had with me I'm missing, so I'm going to have to borrow from Ann. Maybe my boss grabbed it from me earlier this morning. Here it is. No, as is typical with me, I'm the one who put it in the wrong file. Thank you. Taking a step back, on gang injunctions, as we've reported to you recently, and thank you for asking, the process typically begins with LAPD and with reports from law enforcement. And those reports often come from the community that a particular gang in a particular area have become so deeply entrenched and are committing such a high number of criminal incidents. And those incidents can range, sir, as you know, from misdemeanor graffiti incidents, which can be voluminous, all the way up to murder, attempted murder, assault, extortion, and crimes of a violent nature. When a gang has basically broke the plane, as it were, and set up and created a platform where there is such a high level of incidents dating back, we usually look about 2 years, sometimes as many as 5 years. When we have such a high level of incidents and we have an entrenched gang in a geographical area, then, and that we look with LAPD as to whether a gang injunction is the right tool for that area. And we make a judgment. As you've said many times and just said this morning, it's all judgments are subject to review, and no judgment is perfect. But I will say this, and I know you know this well, we take that judgment very seriously and we make it carefully because it is an enormous input of resources. And the gang injunction is a tool which is a broad and comprehensive tool. So when we decide we're going to seek one, we want to make sure that the gang we're looking at really is a gang that's entrenched, has been in that area for a long time, claims a certain territory, and has committed a level of crime which we think the gang injunction will be one of the most effective responses.
Okay. Now, once you establish that process internally, the question before you on this item is what processes and/or are you developing and strengthening your process of communication to the community and also listening to the community give their reactions and/or input toward the city attorney's office when it comes to the dialogue of gang injunctions potentially in their neighborhood?
Yes, and in fact, I believe we are, and we are in large measure because of the leadership of our city attorney, Mr. Delgadillo, but also because of the leadership of this committee, council member yourself, as well as council member Reyes, council member Hahn, and others in the community who have asked us to educate and inform the community more, to listen to the community more. That doesn't mean that at any given moment a neighborhood council decision may impact whether an injunction is going to be sought. But what we are doing particularly over the last 18 to 20 months, is getting out into the community, meeting with community groups, block captains, neighborhood councils where appropriate,
okay,
and listening to them. And I will say this also. What I learned 20 months ago when I started was that, and we've talked about this before in this committee, there is an enormous amount of misunderstanding and misperception, and in many cases, myths that exist about gang injunctions that needed to be dispelled. And that required information and education. And as you, I believe you said to me...
You're setting up your answer perfectly. So give us some examples of what the protocols are for that communication, because you're absolutely right. To some people, they say, I welcome this gang injunction, whatever the heck it is. And some people might say, whoa, wait a minute. Why do we need a gang injunction on my street, et cetera? So there's a whole litany of misunderstandings, understandings, reactions, gut reactions, and intelligent understandings for people who happen to already understand what gang injunctions are if they're fortunate to do so. So once you know that all that different array of thought processes are going on in the minds of the community members, what does the city attorney's office do today, and or what are you planning on doing tomorrow, if anything, different than today when it comes to those communications, be it forums, be it websites, be it in conjunction with the police department or the senior leads or your neighborhood prosecutors? What tools are you implementing? What mechanisms are you utilizing to communicate to the community before a gang injunction actually is granted?
Thank you. We're doing two things, and thanks for focusing me on the specificity of the question. We're pursuing two tracks. Track one is a general track, which is education and information generally about gang injunctions. And to that extent, we have gone to neighborhood councils, block captain meetings, neighborhood meetings, community meetings. Typically, we go, in fact, in every instance that I can think of, we go with our partners, the LAPD. Oftentimes, council staff, sometimes council members like yourself will be present, Councilmember Alarcon and others will be present. The meetings then become, to some degree, educational, maybe 15 to 30 minutes of background information on a gang injunction. And then largely, they become question and answer, almost town hall style. Okay. Those are really general because, and I say this, I had to go through the same process. People need just to learn what a gang injunction is, what it isn't, and they have to learn about the removal process. That's the general track. Track two is the specific track, and this is new, the second track. And it's new in relationship to our education from this committee and the council. What you've told us is that your communities need more than just general education. They also need specific education. And that's track two. And we started that with the Sanford injunction. That was, I think we broke some new ground there, where we actually, after the filing of the injunction was made public, in the 6 to 8 week period that usually exists between the filing of the injunction and the preliminary injunction hearing, we got out to the neighborhood councils at Sylmar, as well as I believe Mission Hills. We got to the block captains, and we had evening meetings with them where we really talked specifically about the injunction we were seeking there and why. And that was something new, and we have every reason to believe that that's the right way to go. We think that we got a lot of good feedback. Both the Mission Hills and the Sylmar neighborhood councils ultimately voted in favor of the injunction. That vote, while it may be of no technical legal consequence in a court of law, was an important, we thought a real important moment, because it said to us, and we know LAPD had the same reaction, this is a vote of confidence that this tool is a tool that can be used appropriately.
Now, in these communications with the broad community, where a gang injunction is looking to be implemented, what do you find is the main benefit when you have that kind of activity and even coming to the community, raising their hand or what have you, as to whether or not they understand and or are okay with a gang injunction in their community or what have you? Like you said, that's not an official vote where if it's X number, percentage say no, then you retract, you file it, and put it on a shelf and not continue. I understand that that's not what it is. It sounds like what you're doing is you're trying to find out if people feel comfortable with understanding what's going to happen, understanding how it affects their community, and understanding the whys as to why this injunction is even being petitioned, correct?
Yes, and I think the main benefit, although I know you and I have had this opportunity in committee to talk about this before, so it may not surprise the chairman, but it may surprise the public to know that the main benefit of attendance at, for instance, the Watts Gang Task Force with Councilmember Hahn, or in Sylmar, or in San Fernando Valley with yourself, there are really two benefits, and it goes both ways. In other words, we believe we have, the main benefit is the education to the entire community of what an injunction is and what it isn't. But I will say this for myself, and I believe for the entire staff of the City Attorney's Gang Division, we also benefit from it. I have learned from the community a great deal in the last 20 months. I didn't know that was going to be part of my job description, and I didn't have an anticipation that I would be learning from the community about their hopes, fears, understandings, misunderstandings, and I can tell you've been to many of those meetings, sir, because you described it perfectly. The full spectrum at almost every meeting, from if it's more than 20 or 30 people up to several hundred, we get the full spectrum of views, from persons who feel that gang injunctions are a negative to persons that feel they are 100% positive, and we get everything in between. And what we come away from those meetings is, on our side, the law enforcement side, is we think we're educated as well, and we think that's helped us evolve. We went in thinking we were going to teach people. I hope we've done that. But I know, speaking for myself, I came out of those meetings educated as well.
So the communication definitely is welcomed by the City Attorney's Office as a two-way street.
Absolutely, sir.
In these communications with the communities, especially when it comes to public forums, or like you said, you have anywhere between 20 to several hundred people.
Absolutely. It has been a learning process on both sides, and it's still evolving. We look forward to more, and we particularly, I have to stress this, when we work with the council, when a council member whose responsibility is the district that we're in works with us, and whether it's any of the council members here or others, those meetings tend to be the best meetings of all, because there is a full spectrum. The council is there, or the council staff, to represent the views of the district, and we're there to represent, in many cases, the views of law enforcement. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different, but it's a much fuller, it's a much more complete procedure.
Before I ask my colleagues if they have any questions, one particular question specifically relating to one of the latest, if not the latest, big meeting where a gang injunction petition was actually in process, and you did have community involvement, community meetings, and dialogue back and forth. Is that something that is now going to be incorporated from here on out as standard practice, or that's something that will just be done where you feel on a case-by-case basis it's necessary?
That's something that's under discussion in our group, but I would certainly say that we are leaning towards making it a standard practice. The only reason I would say that it has not yet been fully adopted by this gang division and my direction of the gang division as a practice is that we're still learning how to do it. We're still experiencing, learning how to, what is needed. Let me step back. Here's what I've learned. I tell this to my prosecutors. I tell it to myself every time I go to a meeting. A community meeting is different than a court of law. In a court of law, where I should be experienced, and I believe I am, and have a certain expertise, certain skills are required, certain approaches, certain types of arguments. Many times it's adversarial in nature. And there's a referee, the judge. In a community meeting, you have to put, it's educational in nature. It's not an adversarial process. And I've had to teach myself that lesson. And we're learning. But I believe that this is a practice that we should continue to follow. I know Rocky Delgadillo believes that. I think that the command staff at LAPD believes that. I think you'll be seeing us at more community meetings with council members, not less. And whether we want to call it an ad hoc process, to coin a phrase, or whether we want to call it a practice, at least under my guidance and under the City Attorney Delgadillo's guidance, I think you will see it as a common practice, particularly where we work with council members who are the representative of their district
Well, yeah, obviously that's, I mean, that was a very pointed question about, is this going to be standard practice? I mean, I think that's what this motion was about, was this one gang injunction, and it didn't seem like the community had an opportunity to have input. I know that there is, and maybe you could address that, because I'd like to know too, because I've got a couple coming up in my district. At what point, is it appropriate to have community input? Because I do know that I'm learning too, but there's a point where you kind of don't want anybody to know. I mean, I know I've had meetings where you talk about it, but we're not really allowed to talk about it for a lot of reasons. So, at what point, I mean, it seems to me that's kind of a delicate line that we're all asked to walk between, the need for a gang injunction, putting together all the necessary documentation that needs to happen, and then at what point do you involve the council member, and in turn, what point is appropriate to involve the community? I also think, when gang injunctions started a long time ago, we didn't have neighborhood councils. So we now have what is supposed to be a vehicle for a broad range of stakeholders to have a voice in decisions that are made, whether it's in the city attorney's office, in the police department, in the city council, in city hall, in decisions that really impact their lives. And certainly gang injunctions impact for good, and there's some negative impact, obviously, on residents of a community. So I said all that to say, I'm not sure that there is a standard practice, but help me understand when it's appropriate and how you plan to engage or allow for community input.
Well, thank you.
Particularly neighborhood councils. How do we?
We've used this word a lot today, but it's an evolving process, and I know that the council members here can speak to that as well, because just a couple of years ago, and certainly when I started, one concern that was raised, among others, by council members was we as council members feel like we're in the dark on this subject, that we don't have, in the first instance, we, the council members, don't have the information. I think we've taken big strides to change that. And we have had some confidential briefings of council members and give you some sense of what is happening in your district. From a law enforcement perspective, we know you know better than I ever will what's happening in your district from a social, from a criminal, from an educational standpoint, and from many other levels. But you also need to know, what is law enforcement doing in my district? That has started, and we're making progress there. But we do want to underline, as I did in my letter to Councilmember Cardenas, something that I know you all know, because we've spoken about this. One, there is, whether it's called a silent majority or whether we use a different term, there are in each of these communities that are scarred by gang violence, a very large percentage of people who are afraid of the gangs or fear for their families. If they themselves are not afraid, they're afraid for their children. They're afraid for their loved ones. They don't want trouble. And they will many times report crimes to the police, report to our neighborhood prosecutors, another tool that we have to gain information, our prosecutors who are in the districts. They'll report trouble, but they certainly don't want to testify about it. And this was something that surprised me, council members, but perhaps I should have guessed this how it would be. Even at the various neighborhood council meetings that we attended and the block captain meetings that we've attended, afterwards, or sometimes before, persons would take me aside and personally say to me, so I've had direct experience of this, I am afraid to stand up and speak, but I do support what you're doing. Right. Now that is one way that we gain information, but we haven't stopped there either. We are going to make it, whether you want to call it a practice or whether you want to call it an approach, after we file for gang injunctions, we agree with you. City Attorney Delgadillo agrees with you, and our gang division leadership agrees with you that, and I believe LAPD does as well, we want to get into the community in an appropriate setting, a safe setting, a setting where people feel safe and comfortable as much as possible, and describe to the people in that community, the neighborhood council seems like a perfect vehicle, what we're doing and why. And that is something new. We started it together with this committee in Sylmar. We've done some of it in the Watts area. And now, over the next 6 months to a year, we'd like to see it expand across the city. And my colleague, Ms. Tremblay, points out that I should also note that as I've said earlier, but I want to really underline, we think the best avenue for this is through the ad hoc committee or through a particular interaction with a council member who represents that district. We've found, again, that when we go into a setting at the behest or request or in coordination with a council member, we have the best representation of the community, a cross-section of the community, and we also have a setting that is the most conducive to education on both ends.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you were to look at a map of Los Angeles and you look at the chronology of these gang injunctions, we're going to find, and I'm assuming, that most of the places that needed it the most were already identified and they have been established, and we're going back maybe 10, 12 years. But as we go through that chronology and you see geographically what's left, do you have an idea of what parts of the city still need that level of attention? And can you give me just a guesstimation as to, I don't need names of areas, but just a percentage-wise of how much you think we need to go in order to create a sense of comfort, or at least balance in the streets that allows people to at least walk on the streets?
Thank you, Council Member. I can give you some estimates, and again, I repeat, we appreciate this committee's questioning, because your questions oftentimes make us go out and get the answers that maybe no one ever asked before. That's the nature of this process. Over the last several months of working with this committee and receiving some questions from both staff as well as council members, we've taken a look at our existing injunctions as well. And we just did let's run the numbers. Let's see what we have, what percentage of the city we think we cover now, what percentage of gangs we think we cover. And our estimates are these, and they're estimates. Some of the estimates are because record keeping is not perfect by any means. And I will say I've learned, and I don't think this is unusual about the city attorney's office, but even in the time I've been there, the 20 months, we've changed our record keeping computer system at least twice. And I think it's changed several times over the last 10 years. That said, right now, the city is roughly 500 square miles. That's what it's believed to be, about 498 square miles. We think we have about 12 to 15% of the city is a safety zone, and about 12 to 15%. It actually worked. It corresponded pretty well, which surprised me again. But I was happily surprised that about 12 to 15% of the city's documented 463 gangs. I think that's the number that the sheriffs and the LAPD are using now. The city has approximately 498 square miles, approximately 463 documented gangs, as documented by our law enforcement partners. We have the square mileage of safety zones is approximately 12 to 15%, and the gangs under injunction are approximately 12 to 15%. We anticipate over the next, all I can look forward to sitting here is about 6 months to 1 year out. And we do anticipate, because that's how long a gang injunction as you know, as I know the council members know well, a gang injunction takes at least 6 months to 1 year of preparation time and investigation time. We anticipate that we will stay on track with the 3 to 5 injunctions a year that the city attorney's office has filed over the past 5 years. So I look forward to working with LAPD and this council in public session and in private session where necessary on seeking 3 to 5 injunctions over the next 6 months to 1 year.
So if we were to look at it, demographic maps, and we were to see the poverty-stricken areas of the city, is it a fair conclusion to say that the poverty-stricken areas will more than likely be the areas in which we'll find these injunctions?
And I apologize in advance, council member, for not, and I say this with all due respect, I don't know if I have an expertise of social engineering to be able to accurately state if an area is a poverty-stricken area. And I don't mean to evade the question. I
No, no,
honestly don't know if
no,
I can answer that question.
And the reason why I'm asking, and there's a point behind this, and it's a startling study that really sticks in my mind, is the USC study,
Yes.
when they covered and reviewed the analysis of neighborhood councils and representation in neighborhood councils, and who actually sat in these positions in the context of who actually lives in these neighborhoods. And my concern is that we need to maintain flexibility in how we move forward in these processes, because I think that we're still learning through the neighborhood council process. And it's probable, because given this differentiation in terms of who is speaking for whom, and you don't have not always a reflection of who lives in these neighborhoods versus who sits in these neighborhood councils. I just think we need to be careful how we proceed until we evolve as a city, as a system, the neighborhood council process, as well as in the gang injunction learning curve, how we proceed. And I just want to make sure we have that type of flexibility, because there is, each area is unique in the city, and how folks react to gang injunctions. And I've had people tell me in the northeast area of Los Angeles,
Yes.
your gang injunction is lowering my property values. Your gang injunction is making our neighborhood look bad. But they don't live in the areas that have been stricken by violence. You know, they're pretty comfortable in their hillside homes, and they
Yes.
get off the freeway, they get on the freeway, but they don't interact with where all this energy is occurring. So I just want to make sure that that's put on the table as delicately as I can, but understanding that we have those kinds of tensions, and I'm hoping we have that flexibility until we have, I guess, a level of maturity in how we evolve as a city through these different systems.
No, thank you. Thank you, Council Member. And I think for us, the buzzwords or the key words there are flexibility, but also delicacy, as Councilmember Hahn said. What we're seeing, what we're trying to establish with the City Attorney's Office under the leadership of Mr. Delgadillo is a balance, And that's the way I know I use it. I'm sure I know I say things. I know I have a tendency to repeat myself, and I know my staff and the people who work with me feel that way. But I say to myself every day, we're looking for a balance. We're looking for a balance. And the balance is a balance between aggressive prosecution of criminal behavior, sometimes called gang banging in common parlance, with an enlightened enforcement that allows for things like the removal petition that we've talked about today, that allows for education of neighborhood councils, that allows for, and this is something else that we're looking at over the last 6 months to a year, and I believe you'll see in the next 6 months to a year. There may be communities, for example, Watts is such a community, where the work of a Councilmember Hahn and others on the Watts Gang Task Force and the LAPD has been so extraordinary and has produced such a noticeable drop in the crime rate that that's an area where, at least in the short term, maybe no new gang injunction will be sought because they're succeeding. Now, as Councilmember Hahn pointed out today, literally an hour ago, we all of us, I know that you more than anyone else, sir, the council members more than anyone, we all fear a bad weekend. A weekend where the fragility of any success we've experienced is broken or shattered by 15 or 20 shootings. And we see those, and we saw those in the Grape Street area in January. That said, we are making progress. And I believe if someone says that the progress is being made in every neighborhood across the city, I think that's an overstatement. But we are making progress in some communities. And in MacArthur Park is an area where we're making a great deal of progress. And in the Northeast, and in the San Fernando Valley. I mean, I know for all three of you that there are parts of your district where great progress is being made. There are other parts where there are real concerns. And we hope that that we can build a level of credibility and trust with you that this street goes both ways, and you can share with us, sometimes in private, other times in public, where you think the problems are and where we can best dedicate our resources.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have two more other items on the agenda. So with that, is there anybody here to speak on item number 1 from the public comment? Come on forward. Turn in your public comment card. Come on up. You're up. State your name for the record.
Good morning. My name is Kim Gill with the Youth Justice Coalition, and I appreciate the historic day that we've just observed. I just wanted to caution us on a few other things that I think are really, really important. The Youth Justice Coalition has been working on this issue now for, I guess, 4 or 5 years. And I don't know that we were the first group, because I think probably 25 years ago when the first gang injunctions were brought, there were groups that raised concerns and spoke to the need to change or even not go with a strategy of gang injunctions. So we also stand on the backs of many people that have gone before us in organizing for changes to gang injunctions and to challenge gang injunctions. But certainly in the last 5 years, we've been trying to be very active and vigilant in terms of gang injunctions that have been served as well as those potentially served. We do outreach to the community weekly to help people petition to get off the injunction, to give people legal education about how injunctions work as well as what to do during a police stop. And we do monthly legal clinics around expungements, petitioning, immigration issues around gang injunctions, as well as other issues. So while we don't feel like we're doing enough, that's kind of the information we're bringing you comes from that work. I think there's a few things that we want to encourage the City Council to look at as you move forward. One is that we're seeing an increasing number of people that when they go to court on gang injunction violations are being asked, and I would say even coerced or forced in many ways, to register as a gang member. We think this is particularly damaging because it basically requires that people state, in order not to have a county jail term, that they are officially gang members. We think it kind of goes against people's Fifth Amendment rights to, against the protection of incriminating yourself, because it is a formal registration that you are admitting gang membership. Much different than a gang database where the police are claiming you're a gang member, to a point where you yourself are putting that in record. We would recommend that that's very damaging to a person's further, future, whether it's school, employment, contact with the police, et cetera, as well as much more difficult to overturn in the future than being on a gang injunction where the police themselves said you were a gang member. Second is that we've done two different...
Continue.
Okay, we've done two different interviews in communities where gang injunctions were either had been placed or were about to be placed. One was of 100 people on the street, random people, some who I'm sure were gang involved, others who were senior citizens, store owners, people that didn't live in the community but were coming in there to do business, in the Pico Union area with the 18th Street injunction, and another 100 surveys in the Imperial Courts area, which was looking at a potential gang injunction against PJ Cripps in Watts. And what was astounding about those surveys is that almost 100% of the surveyors, I think it was about 95 to 99%, said that they agreed, even people that admitted gang membership, said they agreed that people should be prosecuted and arrested for dealing drugs, for extortion, for any other kinds of criminal gang activity. But nearly no one said that people should be arrested or violated in any way by law enforcement because they're associating with other known gang members, because they're loitering or what would be seen as loitering on the street with other known gang members. So I think that while people in the community might say they're in favor of gang injunctions, when you really go down the list of what a gang injunction means, they're not in favor of they might be in favor of the spirit of the gang injunction, but not in favor of the actual way that a gang injunction gets played out. We would recommend these things, therefore, moving forward. And this is based on not only our work in the community, but also going to court with, now at this point, probably over 50 people that are facing gang injunction violations. One, there needs to be a more transparent or independent arm to review any cases where people are actually put on a gang injunction, to have them, to review whether or not they even belong on an injunction. We see a lot of people that are put on who really don't have any criminal background with the gang. And maybe their only criminal arrests, sometimes we find people with no criminal arrests, sometimes we find people that their only criminal arrests have been like possession of weed or drinking in public, not what are seen as like the more notorious gang members. So they're really being put on for association, which is difficult living in a community where there's a lot of gang activity, or where your own family members are gang members. So we would recommend an independent arm of the city, outside the city attorney's office, outside law enforcement, to look at who's served, and then also to look at once the applications come in for removal from a gang injunction, is that really a process that's fair, that looks at, again, is this someone who has a significant criminal background with the gang, or is this someone who's kind of has associates and is operating on the fringes of the gang, or not operating within the gang at all? Second, we would recommend that there be a measuring of the short and long-term impact of gang injunctions in terms of families and communities. We've seen huge destabilization in terms of loss of income, jobs, financial aid for people that are constantly going in and out of the county jail system, even if it's for a few days, losing public entitlements, public benefits, because those few days in county jail lose you that access to those services. We see huge destabilization of communities in terms of mass gentrification or displacement of communities. And we feel like this has led, in the communities we've worked in, to a total restructuring of those neighborhoods and forcing families into areas of the county where there's even less resources and even less opportunity for advancement. So, for example, we're seeing huge flight from Watts, for example, to the Antelope Valley, and then huge backlash against those families when they arrive there in terms of law enforcement, politics, the lack of resources and services, lack of jobs, and really being trapped in an area of the county with a lot less opportunity. We see huge amount of separation of families, separation of fathers from their young children, separation of teenagers from their families who can no longer feel like they can go into the neighborhood, a certain amount of homelessness of people who are on gang injunctions who are then homeless and are what we call couch surfing, where they might not be in the shelter system, but are really going from couch to couch in search of homes and don't feel like they can come back to their home, which is in the injunction area. And when we looked at where injunctions had been placed over the past 25 years, we found that they were not placed in the areas with the greatest amount of violence. And in fact, in Watts, where many would argue the greatest amount of violence has occurred, those gang injunctions are relatively new, from like 2003, 2004. The injunctions were first placed and continue to be placed primarily in communities that are facing or potentially facing gentrification or bordering white communities. And so I would say that an independent investigation of whether or not injunctions are used as a political tool or an economic tool or a real estate tool as opposed to a real public safety tool. Finally, we feel like looking more closely at, is this a really wise use of resources? When you look at those cities and counties across the nation who have really I guess like curtailed their gang violence, what strategies have they used? We can't find a county where gang injunctions have been any part, let alone a big part of their strategy. So in 1950s New York City, they established a youth board, put over 300 gang intervention workers on the street in the 1950s. We have 61 for a much larger area, and opened youth centers up in the junior high schools and high schools from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. Their gang violence dropped significantly within a matter of a few years. In the 1960s and 70s, Chicago used a jobs development and entrepreneurship program in Lawndale, and their gang violence dropped almost to an insignificant level, while other areas of Chicago that did not employ that measure still saw huge levels of gang violence. In the 1990s in New York City, they established a thing called Cops and Kids, where they pretty much gave an equal amount of money to police suppression as they did to youth development, not like here where we don't even have 1% of the same size of the city budget going to gang intervention and youth development, nor do we have a youth development department in the city of Los Angeles. They had already in the 50s created a Department of Youth Services, which grew eventually to be a Department of Youth Development. And that infusion of resources meant that by 1980s, 1990s, when other cities and counties across the country were seeing a huge increase in gang violence, New York City did not see that. In 1990s, San Francisco and Oakland created Kids First initiatives to put a significant amount, 5 to 7% of the county's budget toward youth development. Again, have seen much less in terms of not only gang violence, but also in terms of the young people that go into the juvenile justice system and are fast-tracked to prison. So we feel like without that kind of investigation, we will continue to say that gang injunctions are poor use of resources and do a lot to not stabilize communities, not make communities stronger, but actually destabilize and impoverish the communities and families that we care about and live in.
Thank you for your testimony. Also, Kim, you're more than welcome to make an appointment in my office if you could bring somebody with you who was put in that position where in order for them not to go to jail, they had to sign to the fact that, or commit to the fact that they are a gang member when they felt that that was the main reason why they did it was because they either went to jail or made this statement and copped to it, whether it was true or not. If you could bring that person forward, I would love to interview them myself. I would really appreciate it if they could bring their lawyer along with them. If they can't afford them, if there's any...
Ron Joseph's no longer here, but
I know, but
we could
But
try to
if
get
for
them.
some reason their attorney needs to charge, I'll figure out some way to pay for that attorney's time to educate me about that process, because I am not a lawyer. I pride myself on not having spent hardly any time whatsoever in court other than on jury duty, and so I look forward to the opportunity to be educated about those instances. Okay? And thank you for your
Hey,
testimony.
I just want to make one more statement, too. I just want to
Make it
thank...
quick.
I will. I wanted to thank publicly all the young people and families who I feel really made this gang injunction exit possible and made it happen, and were the first to call for it. None of whom were at the press conference, and none of whom were in front of the cameras, and probably never will be in front of the cameras. And I understand we're going to have to call our own press conference if we want that, but I just want to at least
And I'll
publicly
be with
acknowledge-
you at that press conference when it
Okay.
happens.
All right, thanks.
I just want to ask, it's a statement. I want to appreciate overview of how we possibly leverage resources to deal with a much more comprehensive approach to what gang injunction does. I quite frankly saw the type of madness that was occurring in around Pico Union, Westlake in the early 90s, and something had to happen. And when you start looking at the change, it is a change that allowed for a good number of the families that live there today to actually be in the park and out in the street without fear of being shot. But I think we have a lot more to do in terms of how we leverage our resources. I think the process that our chairperson has been doing for the past few months, if not years, and is we're trying to create that infrastructure. So hang in there, and we are trying to go in that direction. So I appreciate your insight.
Okay, thank you. With that, anybody else here to make public comment on item number 1? Seeing and hearing none, public comment on item number 1 is now closed. Appreciate the city attorney's testimony and also taking notes while the person was testifying. I think that you inherently expressed, Bruce, you expressed that even in these hearings, you're here not only to present, but also to listen and to learn as well. So thank you so much for taking note on those matters that were brought up by the public. With that, we'll note and file item number 1. I do apologize, Bruce. We are going to go to item number 3 first, and then we'll go back to item number 2. We have Chief Beck here, and I always feel...
I agree. I couldn't agree with you more, sir.
I always feel guilty about having him sit here at his high level and waiting to make his presentation. And Chief Cooper as well. I feel guilty about you sitting back there too. You took a long time to earn all those stripes and that responsibility, and I'm sure you got a whole lot of things you got to be doing today. So we don't.
More city service left, right?
So I apologize. Earlier I was trying to take items out of order, but I think you were outside having catching up. But I apologize for that. We are on item number 3. Please read.
Item number 3, motion, Cardenas Parks, relative to developing protocols and guidelines for interaction with gang intervention workers when responding to gang-related, gang-associated, and gang-motivated incidents and related matters.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you coming forward.
Thank you.
Who wants to start?
Sir? Charlie Beck, I'm the Chief of Detectives from the Los Angeles Police Department.
No, hold on a second.
Yes, sir.
I apologize. I keep having to remind you guys, like I did to Gannon earlier in the press conference. You state your title, and you know and we know inherently some of the things that have to do with gang matters and street-level activity from the police department. But can you break down a little bit as to why you and Gannon are here on this matter? You have a lot of responsibility with the police department, but specifically, what are your responsibilities related to this? That way people can understand that you have a very high title, you have a lot of responsibility, but how does it relate to this?
The way it relates to this is that I am tasked with the citywide oversight of gang operations.
There you go.
And so one of the reasons that Chief Bratton tasked Pat and I with that is exactly what brings us before this committee, our experience in South Bureau and his desire to replicate that in other parts of the city. Although there are other parts of the city that are very strong in this area, the Valley is one of them.
Okay. Thank you. So between you and Gannon, those are some of the main issues that you are engaged with on a day-to-day basis with your responsibilities with the police department, correct?
Yes, that's absolutely right.
Not only engaged with it, but overseeing it as well.
That's absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Councilman Cardenas, Councilman Reyes, my name is Kwame Cooper, and I'm here.
What's your title?
Currently, I'm a battalion chief assigned to Battalion 1, which covers the downtown area, but specifically here to represent Chief Berry and the fire department's role and commitment to involve itself with the issue of gang involvement, particularly in the area of response and intervention. With me is Akil Bashir, who is the president of Maximum Force, who is a partner with the fire department to assist us in that regard with regard to training and development of tactical protocols for first responders.
Now, one of the things that I think the community needs to understand is, and please forgive me, gentlemen, we've had various conversations. We've often broken down a lot of these matters on a very simplistic and a very sophisticated level or what have you. But I'm going to ask you some basic questions. What the heck is a battalion chief from the fire department doing talking on this matter, and you're talking about first responders? Am I to assume that if there's a shooting or a gang-related violent crime that just occurred and there's even before the yellow tape goes up, is it possible that the first officials on the scene are in fact people who work for the fire department?
Yes, sir. Oftentimes when there are gang-related shootings or what we call shooting incidents, oftentimes firefighters are the first responders, and depending on the number of individuals that are actually hurt or injured, it could bump up to where a battalion chief would have to show up and actually coordinate an incident that now becomes what we call a multi-casualty incident.
Okay, now that a battalion chief, are they going to be dressed in firefighter gear, or are they likely to be dressed more like you're dressed today in your suit with your badge? And this is really important for us to clarify. Is it likely that somebody from the fire department would actually show up with a badge instead of gear that they're going to be, pulling a hose with?
What you'll find is in the field, the battalion chiefs that work out of the fire stations, when they respond to incidents like that, they'll show up wearing a black uniform, a badge, a helmet, and what we call a brush jacket with protective gear under it. And they would clearly distinguish themselves as firefighters working in a command structure, of which they are now the responsible person to collaborate with LAPD in order to manage that incident.
But the thing is, the fact that they have a badge and they look official, somebody could think that they're law enforcement.
Oftentimes, that happens, quite frankly, and what we've done respectfully to law enforcement is distinguish ourselves by making sure that we wear fire department equipment, gear, that clearly distinguishes us as firefighters, such as our helmet and or a very bright brush jacket.
Do you know about how long it's been since that practice for those purposes has been going on?
During my
that
time,
conscious acknowledgement to make sure that people recognize you as there from a health safety perspective and as part of the firefighter crew, not necessarily part of the police crew.
And during my career with LA Fire Department, and it's been roughly about 28 years, I would say that somewhere during the early 90s, we began to see the need in some instances to really distinguish ourselves as firefighters so that it does not interrupt our ability to come in and actually provide that first responder medical care for the person who might be injured. And quite frankly, in working with the interventionists, we found that some really good positive things have come out of that, so that there's a better understanding of who exactly is who in the chain of command when we respond to those types of incidents.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
you mentioned interventionists. I'm a little confused because just recently I saw Mr. Bashir recently, and I've known him for many, many years, and I always knew him with the title of being an interventionist. And I'm a little confused. Are you also associated with the fire department formally? Is your day job or what?
Councilman Cardenas, Councilman Reyes, pleasure to be here. Yes, I am. I've been doing intervention work, as you well know, for over 35 years, hardcore intervention work. I've been on the fire department for 28 years. So when the fire department decided to address the ability to refine firefighters and being able to engage in street work, obviously I was the one they called, and that's how our relationship started.
So you've been with the fire department for 28 years, and you've been working on street-level intervention work for about 35 years?
Almost 40, right.
Oh, okay. But the one thing that I want to clarify is, does one interfere with the other?
No, it doesn't.
Does one complement the other?
It actually complements, because as you related the fact that firefighters are usually on some of the most violent scenes before anybody else arrives, trying to put that scene together and put the people together. And then paramedics, they basically roll out in two-man teams individually by themselves. You have fire inspectors who are individualized, who go in some of these same besieged areas, and protocol development of operational instruction on how to operate is mandatory. And I think the fire department has been blessed over the years that it has a buffer zone based on the fact that most people have a respect for the fire department, but the nature of violence is seriously changing. And the Chief Barry, as well as Chief Bamatri, realized it, and they realized that they have to create some type of infrastructure to deal with the problem. Hence, they called maximum force.
Okay, thank you. I have a series of questions. First, I want to ask representatives of the police department about at the Expo Center about a year ago. There was some work done on public safety protocols and with gang intervention workers or what have you. What was the purpose and the outcome of that gathering?
Councilman, about 2 years ago, actually, we started our meetings at Expo Center with a number of the community-based organizations that funded gang intervention, and a number of the people that have been involved in the work for many years. Bill Martinez is in the audience, and he's certainly one of those individuals. I know he spoke before the committee before. We brought those individuals together, Pat and I, when we were in charge of South Bureau, in order to start build what I think the committee wants to do, which is to improve the relationship between public safety, fire department, police department, and the city, and people that do intervention work, and make what we do complement each other. You know, we have worked in silos for many years. You know, I have come full circle in my belief on what will lead the city out of the issues that confront it regarding gang violence, and it's only by working together, you know, in what's been called a wraparound approach by many folks. I'll use that term; it's a good term. Seeing things not only from a suppression standpoint, which we're very good at, you know, this is not bragging. It's because we have the most experience at it. We have the largest gang problem in the country, so we become good at it. That's suppression, but suppression has not led to solution, and so we wanted to explore what we could do better with intervention as far as working together on the same problem at the same time. And many times, while a lot of good intentions were happening on both fronts, the resources weren't focused. You know, we would see the problem one way, intervention would see it another. They'd be working on one set of issues, we'd be working on another, never on the same page. And so that was the basic format by which we started that, and it grew and grew and became kind of a forum for what do we need to do to professionalize intervention to the point that it can work more seamlessly and therefore be funded by government, and that's the format that those meetings ended up taking. And the fire department was very involved. You know, obviously Keel's been from the outset. You know, and Kwame always there or with his representative. So to answer your question, we began to develop our internal protocols of how we would work within South Bureau and then within other parts of the city too, because we invited people from all over the city, to police department from all over the city to participate. And those protocols were largely based on personality, largely based on the exchange of cell phone numbers, the inclusion of intervention in police department briefings and the exchange of information, so that we could start working together on some of these problems, and we felt that we had very good results. But it was, again, as I said, very personality based. It was on the fact that somebody knew that they could call Commander Gannon, or they could call Captain Green, or they could call Captain Tingarides, because they had their cell phones, and that's the way that it worked for about a year. And we had good results because we had good people all committed to working together. But that brings us to where we are now, and the need to develop protocols so that we can spread this further, so that we can develop into the next iteration of this and multiply our success. So that I hope I answered your question there and didn't go too long in the explanation, but that kind of brought us to this point.
Well, the thing is, you touched on something that's very delicate, and I'd like you to help clarify. Now, intervention work / and street-level interventionists, we've now defined in the city as with two kinds of interventionists, but let's talk about the street-level interventionist work, because I think that's what you're referring to when it comes to like a hot scene. For example, just over about a year ago or so, there was a rash of shootings in a 36-hour period where 17 people were injured and 4 people were killed. And it's my understanding that these protocols that have been developed over time and more intensely in the last couple of years actually came into play with circumventing that violence escalating to perhaps 34 people being injured and 8 people being killed. But with all due respect, the intervention work is separate and apart from the police work, correct? I mean, they interact, but I just want to make it very clear that people understand that police officers are there to try to deal with the crimes that were committed. But interventionists, street-level interventionists, are there to try to make sure that that situation does not escalate, such as retaliation shootings are circumvented, so that people calm down, so that the community doesn't see, instead of 36 hours of a rash of shooting, they see 3, 4, 5, 6 additional days of that, until either people run out of bullets, or they just finally get tired, or they think that their work is done. Is that an accurate description of what the interventionists are trying to do, which is trying to prevent that escalation and ongoing violence, where the police are not exclusively, but primarily looking at trying to make sure that they finish the job of investigating the crimes that were committed, correct?
Well, that's correct. I always like to think of it, I'm a simple guy, I like to think of it as that we're on different roads to the same destination. We both want to stop violence. That is the goal of intervention. That is the goal of the fire department. The fire department wants to stay in the station and not have to go out on multiple shootings.
Has paramedics.
That's right.
And
That's right.
primarily at a scene like that, there's not a fire per se. It's
No.
a hot situation, but there's usually bloodshed, and therefore the fire department is out there because their paramedics, their city workers, their paramedics within those firehouses are on the scene first.
Mr. Chair, if I may just jump in real quick, do you feel, given that you are on different roads, that the culture within these different departments are ready for a different set of protocols to create a different type of interaction? I mean, is it something that you find in the culture of your respective departments to behave that way? Or is that something that we need to cultivate? I mean, I just want to get a sense of I just want to get the reality check here.
Well, that's a very important question, because that is the key question. And that is a lot of what I'm engaged in working on now. This is and I speak from personal experience here, and I know that if Pat had the mic, he would give you the same story. We came from a place in the beginning of our careers, in the middle of our careers, where suppression was seen as the answer to gang violence, and it is a partial answer, but it's not the complete answer. And there are many parts of the organization that still believe that to be true.
You're talking about the police department as the organization?
I can just talk about the police department. Kwame can talk about the fire department.
Yes.
But there has been a tremendous shift in the last couple of years. You know, and the police department's a big ship, and it takes a long time to turn it. And, you know, before you really truly win the hearts and minds of everybody, a lot of things have to happen. But the leadership of the department believes in this. And I'm not just talking about the chief and the commander who spend most of their day at Parker Center. I'm talking about the captains in the violent neighborhoods that are directly dealing with this issue day to day, and the lieutenants that run the gang units. And now that, has it filtered down to every last gang officer? No. But will it? Yes. And I am a student of this organization. I've been an LAPD officer for 32 years. My father was an LAPD officer before me. My daughter is an LAPD officer. If there's anything I know, it's that organization. And it is in the midst of a change. And that change is being facilitated by groups such as this committee and by the mayor's office and by the combined decision that this is the road to travel and that this will make us better. Next week, Commander Gannon and I will be at a 2 days worth of meetings where we will address every gang officer in the city, and this will be one of the topics. Every gang officer in the city.
Thank you. Long way.
I like
Councilman,
to hear from,
I would like to do it for you, but I'm really doing it for me.
No, hey, you're doing it for all the right reasons. Don't worry about me. Go ahead.
I would like to hear from the fire department, but I did want to have a follow-up question, but I'll wait. Yes.
Thank you, Councilman Reyes. And so to specifically answer the question, as firefighters, we're encouraged by the results of what we're getting with regard to some training that we've been doing with first responders, law enforcement, and gang interventionists under the leadership and in collaboration with Maximum Force. There was a time as firefighters where, with regard to neutrality and by virtue of what we do, we instantly gained a respect in terms of service delivery. And to a large part, without a doubt, that is still the case. However, we see the changes in social conditions and environments, and to ensure that we maintain that level of respect and trust, both from firefighters to the community and community to us, this is an issue that we have to engage in. And so where it is a paradigm shift for first responders to, quote unquote, have to engage, in this case, with gang interventionists, it's also an opportunity. And the reason why I say I'm encouraged is because we recently just completed, with Maximum Force, 3 days of street survival first responder training for all the firefighters in South LA in the Crenshaw area. Now, what does that mean? That means that in this room, on 6 occasions, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 70 firefighters showed up from the rank of firefighter to captain and chief officer, and with the fire department and Maximum Force, Akil providing the tactical training, and myself providing the department's policy, and LAPD coming and talking about the climate with regard to gang issues in the city, and then we had an interventionist come and speak. The results that we're getting back from that is telling us that we're on the right road. And so as we continue to complete that, because that was phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and this is the part that will be coming up in November, is where we will then take the interventionists that were trained out of the Professional Community Intervention Training Institute, bring all 50 of them together with the company officers in all of those fire stations to begin phase 3 of training. Now, what does phase 3 focus on? It focuses on developing relationships so that when Captain Cooper shows up to this incident and an interventionist walks up to me and we see each other, there's instantly some type of connection. Why? Because we begin to work on that prior. And then when in fact I need that interventionist to assist me, in one case with crowd control, because it's prohibiting us from getting in there quickly as paramedics and firefighters to provide the service, he or she is able to do that. And so we find that it's important in phase 3 to deepen what we've started in terms of the relationship with the first responders and the interventionists so that it will allow us to provide better service when we show up to those hot scenes, Councilman Cardenas, that you talked about. And quite frankly, it's quite chaotic, and LAPD is there, and they're providing the safety that we need, but together, the three entities really could make a difference. And so I'm really, really, really encouraged that although it's a paradigm shift, that as firefighters, the turnout will be good, very good.
And that leads to my follow-up question and more reflection of what I've been going through as a deputy for 10 years and now as a councilman for 7. But in the early 90s, we did have occasion where we would have gang interventionists and police officers in the room, a firefighter, and we were talking about what happened in a certain incident in Lincoln Heights. But it was clear to me that there was no trust in the room. It was clear to me it was really, really thick. I mean, the tension was thick. The body language, like, I just to myself, we made a big mistake. Like, we shouldn't all be in this room right now. But we were there. And so we tried to create a dialogue that spoke about, okay, what next? And this is like the early 90s. So at that moment in time, we just went through some courtesies and treated each other with respect, and we had an exchange, but I was more glad that the meeting was over. Fast forward 2 years ago, much different in terms of the level of engagement. The trust wasn't really there yet, but the engagement was different. I mean, there was some dialogue. They talked about where one should be, who they should talk to, but nothing very specific. But at least we had a conversation. It wasn't just courtesy. So my question is follows. What could we do, or yourselves, or how do we begin to prepare the gang intervention component to develop the skill sets so that we can gain trust? Now, is it a skill set we're looking for, or is it, how does that trust evolve? Is it a matter of communication? Is it the biases we have because of the differences in education? I mean, I'm just trying to see where are the tangibles? What do we work with to instill that trust? And I just want to open that up.
Okay.
I would like to address that. Grab the microphone, Q.
I would like to address that, Councilman Reyes, and I think that was an excellent question. And first and foremost, before I go any further, I really have to give my accolades to Chief Beck, Commander Gannon, the Councilman Tony Cardenas, as well as some of the field officers, Mark Durrell, Curtis Whittle, who've been doing outstanding work. But very important question. If you go back years, and again, I've been doing this a long time, one of the main defensiveness has been the fact that there has not been operational protocol. When you look at the police department, and we have experts in here, I cannot speak for them or to them. When you look at the fire department, what you see is traditionally infrastructural foundation building. You see standard operating procedures, standard operating guidelines. And unfortunately, we've got some outstanding gang interventionists doing some outstanding work, and I applaud all of them. But it's been a lack of fundamental protocol. Now, gang interventionists historically, going back to when I was doing it and still am back at the 69, we did it based on, as Chief Beck said, relationship building, emotionalism, etc. That has changed, and I think what you're going to see through the development of protocol, one of the things that we've been able to do is put a structure in place that the individual community intervention specialists operate from. Now, you'll get a lot of reverberation. You'll hear gang interventionists talk about, well, in each of our communities, things are different. That's historically true, and you have to flex the neighborhood based on the given set of circumstances, the risk factors, the risk triggers. But what you fundamentally have to do is create a generic blueprint that historically most of the gang interventionists are going to operate from. What I mean by that is when you have a shooting, when you have a knifing, when you have a gang assault, etc., there has to be certain fundamentals that they know that they're going to adhere to, as well as the outside entities, the fire department, police, etc. That's what builds the respect. And lastly, the trust factor. The trust factor is built when you know that people have trained and developed themselves to where they're given asset to the community as well as the emergency responders that they deal with and others. And that has been historically missing because you've had individuals who have operated from developed criteria that they developed because they dropped out of the set 10 years ago, and this is what they do for that neighborhood. So I think because of the unifying and also the individuals coming out, one of the things the fire department wanted to do was similar to what the police department was trying to do, and that was to develop a liaison with police officers so identification would be on point when certain police officers rode to a given scene. There were certain key contacts, and the fire department has established that same protocol. Certain key people, they know they can contact. They know they're an asset to the community because these guys have been trained in CPR. They've been trained in the actual standards of operation from how the fire departments operate, so they understand each other a whole lot better, and you break down that defensiveness as well as developing the character of the people that are in the training because now they know how each other work. They know how each other respond under pressure, and they see these same officers, fire department, experts come into the room, so now they build the personal relationship, so there's a trust factor. And lastly, that is going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. So, but with the people that we have here, with the progressive movement from the council, from the police department, from the fire department, and from the interventionists who are on the street, who have embraced and understand the ideal of professionalism, you're going to see a major move, but it's going to take time.
Now, I want to applaud our Councilman Cardenas for this motion because it does beg the question, do we have, if you see these three rings that were operating differently in the neighborhoods, and over time you see these three rings emerging, there's some overlap within the three rings, and that's what I think you're describing is how does that overlap begin to define itself? Do the gang interventionists have enough support to be able to respond in such a way where it can be received by the fire department and the police department? Or is that something we have to continue working on so that that overlapping area of these three rings actually have some semblance of structure so that it can be effective? And I throw that out there to get a great understanding of what would be the next steps.
There are some next steps that have to be occurring, and I think that I had discussions yesterday with the mayor's office about where we need to go with them. One we need to establish some clear identified boundaries so that it's easily understood who has license to operate where, and so that it's not all personality based where Pat goes, okay, I got this, who has this area, so that this is all well defined. So we need to do that, and they're working on that as they move forward.
So one of the things that inherent in what you just described, you're going to be talking to the street level officers next week in mass when it comes to the gang unit, right?
Yeah. Yes, but this is not the first time, though. But this is ongoing.
Thank you. It's ongoing, and it's shaping.
Won't be the last.
Thank
time,
God, in the right direction, and it's becoming more and more prevalent within the police department. But inherently, in what you just described is, you're asking your gang unit to trust in the moment in that situation when they encounter an interventionist at a scene or what have you. That's part of what you're describing, right? Because not everybody can know every officer's name and every interventionist's name in every community, so that they have to trust, and that's why you have protocols.
That's exactly
because protocols are inherent in the process. It's not specific to a person's name, correct?
That's exactly
Not specific to a certain named officer, not specific to a certain named interventionist. It's protocol so that people understand when they talk to somebody and they identify themselves as an interventionist or what have you, that officer knows how to interact with that individual. Correct?
That's exactly right. Identification is key. Notification is another place that's key. You know, so I think that then clarification of boundaries. I think those are kind of the three things that we need to improve upon, so that we can have a better working system. I think these are all agreed upon by everybody.
And it's also inherent in what Councilmember Reyes described, a meeting 15, 16 years ago in the early 1990s, where just the air was so thick in that room, where you had interventionists of back then, certainly not as developed as they are today. You had a police department and officers in the room, certainly not as developed as today as to what their role is in interaction with those other people in the room. What you're describing as well is that officers and or interventionists should have the right and the responsibility to express themselves when they're frustrated with an officer, with an interventionist, go to their commanders or what have you and say, I got to explain to you, I was out on the scene and I didn't feel comfortable with this interventionist. Or an interventionist expressing and bringing up the ladder or what have you, saying, you know what, there was a scene, everything was okay, but my comfort level wasn't that well because the language that an officer used with me was not cool. We got through the scene, but the bottom line is they got to feel comfortable to go ahead and bring that up the chain of command so that people can actually address those inconsistencies so that hopefully people can learn to respect that there are interventionists and they have a role in the community. Interventionists respect the fact that officers are individuals as well, but that they need to learn how to communicate with each other as well, correct? Is that part of what you're trying to establish as your protocols and the norms within your department as a police department?
Yes, and that's one of the other pieces is a liaison entity, and somebody that breaks down those barriers you talked about, that becomes an avenue rather than making when things just don't go right. Not that there's a formal complaint, but hey, this could have been handled better. We needed
sure.
to
or language that was used, or somebody got put off by the way they were talked to.
Somebody didn't understand somebody didn't understand the role of intervention. Somebody didn't understand yellow tape protocols, that kind of thing. So that's a key piece, and I think Curtis is probably still here. Curtis is right there. Curtis is the model for this. He was our original gang intervention liaison in South Bureau. They have now he's come up. He's working citywide with me to develop more like him, so that intervention entities have somebody to go to. Now he's handling a lot of folks right now, and a lot of folks go directly to him. But he is exactly what you're talking about.
And he works for the police department.
He's a sergeant for the police department.
He's a sergeant of police, has been for many years, a long-time sergeant in a gang unit, very experienced in the ways of street gangs, but also very humanistic, very gregarious, somebody that people can talk to, and somebody that police officers respect.
Well, if he ever told me something, I would just zip my lip and say, I'd say yes, sir. I'd say yes, sir. And if I disagreed with him, I would probably wait till later and send Michael or Edo from my office to go tell him I disagreed. But at that moment, I certainly. And for those of people who aren't in the room, he's 6'6", 6'7", in good shape, and you have a great smile, though.
Careful there, Tony. Careful, Mr. Chair. I was going to say...
My voice is so much louder when he stands behind me.
I wonder why. But I do want to, I don't want to sound impatient, but how do we see this coming together? Like, what products are we speaking to?
Timelines.
I mean, when does it begin to become visible? How do we begin to engage it? I mean, are we still at the conceptual stage?
No.
Are we? I mean, I just want to get a feel for, and how can we be supportive in trying to make this happen sooner than later?
There's some solid deliverables here that have to take place. As you're both well aware, that the city's RFP process will begin for intervention, and that has to occur. Then we can that will help us with the identification piece, so that there is a way that people can show their identification to people that don't know them and say, I'm involved in the city's gang intervention program. So that's a key piece. The notification piece, and this is a good piece for the council. When those identifications are made, when those individuals are selected, they have to become part of the city's notification system for violent incidents. Now, Pat and I are part of that system. Luckily, that system is in my shop. I own that system. It's the RACER system that makes all the notifications about violence in the city to the police department. We'll include them in that. but we're going to need notification devices. BlackBerry is the commonly used term, so that this information can get out. The protocols, which this committee is asking for, need to be in place to talk about these things and how they work. The nuts and bolts of them, what you do when you're notified, what after you go to a scene. I'm talking from the hardcore intervention standpoint. What's your feedback loop? Are you responsible to talk to who about what? And that kind of thing. And then how do we measure? The metrics is very important. The measurement metrics, and there's a huge, obviously. Pat and I look at it a little bit differently because we have our own police department measurement metrics, but those are not necessarily the ones that we need to use for gang intervention. There's a number of other, maybe a little less quantifiable community aspects that are very important. Community surveys, and seeing how people perceive the level of gang violence in their community. Those things are very important. So those kind of metrics have to be put in place. I got a long list of stuff.
No, but I guess what I'm getting at is that
But a lot of what you just described, excuse me, I happen to know intimately how fast this stuff is happening, but a lot of what you just described in the last 3 minutes in your answer, a lot of that is going to culminate 90% of it in the next few months.
I think so.
Yeah. So
Okay.
timing-wise,
Timing's very good.
This has been worked on for years,
Yes.
and it's really coming to a crescendo of action now as we speak and over the next few months.
and I'm sorry, but are we also nurturing, for lack of a better word, the gang intervention side? I mean, I mean, because we are governmentally funded, we're part of the city budget. We have that discretion because we have a budget, but
Yes.
because we're going through these funding rounds with different contracts and gang intervention programs, the consistency is not always there. I mean, I've seen them come and go. I've seen them burn out. I've seen some that have stayed on heroically and just don't let go. But are we nurturing that end or that side of the equation?
I think that's an extremely important question, and one of the ways that is ongoing. First of all, is the things that the fire department and the police department are involved in right now. Akil's program is a key component of the training and the kind of the indoctrination into the system and how the system works for intervention. It's really important, but it's also part of a larger scheme that's being worked on, and I know you both know this, by the Advancement Project in conjunction with the county and with the police department and the fire department on building a bigger training program, a community intervention academy that includes not only a long-term course that is all about what Akil teaches, but other things too, and then a component, and this is a really important part to Pat and I and Kwame, is that there's a component for the training of public safety individuals too. So we have a set structure and this is not just LAPD, because as you both know, you both are bordered by other entities, and we have to involve all the major city chiefs and the sheriff in it. And so I have people, I have a sergeant assigned to me, not Sergeant Woodle, significantly smaller sergeant, but she's very smart. And she's working directly with the sheriff on developing our training program for the law enforcement and fire side, so that we have my goal is that by next summer we have we've established a program that's already ongoing that trains people in this new philosophy, so that when Pat and I retire, which hopefully will happen, and when Kwame goes, and if Akil ever quits this stuff, that we will have a system by which this perpetuates.
Exactly. Thank you for pointing that out, because this isn't, that's one of the things that frustrates me about what our society has become, is we tend to take one tact as a society and say this is the answer. But the fact of the matter is, what we're trying to do is break new ground on creating additional protocols, systems of operation, and formality for having more than one answer to the situation of violence in our most challenged communities. And that's why intervention needs to become formalized. That's why we're having the development, and we've recognized the need in the development for academies. We've recognized the need for protocols. We recognize the need for us to have systems in place where interventionists can honestly say, not only do I have the street credibility, but I've also formally have agreed to and engaged and passed certain requirements when it comes to taking courses, dialoguing with theorists on this issue, adding to the dialogue and the understanding of what intervention is today in 2008, and the fact that it is evolving, and it'll evolve in 2009 and 10, which was very different from what was going on 10 years ago. The police department does that all the time. We just take it for granted because the police department has academies and they're constantly changing and redialing some of the things, or even adding sensitivity training and things of that nature to our officers that are graduating today, where they may not have had those courses or those requirements for police officers that graduated 10 years ago. So the fact of the matter is, Mr. Reyes, what we're finally doing in the city, we're recognizing that intervention work is very intricate. It's very specialized. But at the same time, in order for it to be respected and formally in place and recognized by all of the interaction with interventionists, including the police department, the fire department, is we have to have protocols, we have to have academies, we have to have formality.
I think there's, I'm sorry, Chief, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'll wait, sir.
I think when it's strategic, when it's timely, I think this is something we should share with the whole council, because there is a lot of information here that we need to reinforce confidence. My sense right now, and I don't want to be an alarmist, but because of the poverty that's being felt now, the displacement, the foreclosures, the level of drug, the level of anxiety and stress I feel in the neighborhoods I represent, it feels like 1992. It feels like the way it felt right before the riots. At that time, we were organizing nonprofits because we were going through cutbacks. Then Mayor Reardon was going to go through a whole process of cutting back all these programs because of the economic recession we were having then. A sheer coincidence. We organized about, I'd say, 20-something organizations in the Northeast and around Pico Union. And we had a network, and we were going to march on City Hall because of these cutbacks. And we were gearing up for that. That's the weekend when the riots hit. Now, when the idea of bring out the brooms and just start sweeping, we already had an infrastructure in place to move on that like the next day because we were ready to march. That happened in the north. The south was a whole different dynamic. But my guess is that, or my gut feeling is telling me that we should be sharing, if you think it's strategic, this to the council, and for the city can see that we're doing this work, if it's strategic. If it's not comfortable, then we shouldn't do it. But my gut feeling, Mr. Chair, and I say this publicly, is I just really sense a level of anxiety out there that is disconcerting, and I feel it in a very deep way around downtown. I feel it in Pico Union. I see it in the Northeast, especially in the Lincoln Heights area, when people are losing their homes, people trying to find a place to live, and the gangs are just getting stronger for it. I mean, they're like vultures. They're just picking people up, and all this traction we're gaining is I mean, we need to stay strong in that consistency. But this is an amazing evolvement. I think this is an amazing piece that we're in right now, and we should be sharing this, and we should be creating confidence that we have a semblance of order or semblance of structure, that we are doing something with these programs, and there is a real sense of hope because of this level of organization and dialogue, and those are just my 2 cents on this thing. But
well, I think we're fortunate that we've made the progress we have.
Right.
Unfortunately, Councilmember Reyes, I don't think anybody is here to say that we've made all the progress we need to make and we're there. But thank God we've made the progress we have, and I think that should we have an escalation of incidents or what have you in the near future, I think that we're better prepared to respond to that, both on the intervention level and with the police department and fire department, everybody who's much more conscious of how intricate.
Maybe even a status report, a progress report. I mean, whatever is comfortable. I mean, there's a lot of good work happening here.
Well, what this committee is going to instruct the
Excuse me.
departments to do. Go ahead.
Yeah, sir, and if I may, Councilman Reyes, just very briefly, in response to your question, you were asking about next steps, and so specifically from the fire department, I'd just like to briefly share with you what we've done and where we're at. And so we initiated a pilot program, as I briefly mentioned, and it's in collaboration with Maximum Force. In the first portion of the program, the interventionists were the target students, and there are a multitude of agencies that presented there: law, fire, probation, first aid, that made presentations within that 16-week period of time. But the essential part of
city and county.
City and county, yes, sir. Thank you.
Public Defender Office also.
And what that did was really introduce the interventionists to what we do and how we operate as firefighters. And that was absolutely critical. And the stuff that was coming out of that, I'd be more than happy to share with you in terms of private conversations. So that was phase one. And then, as I mentioned, phase two was now bringing the firefighters together, the first responders, and train them in this new paradigm shift in terms of tactical things and other agencies that we're collaborating with, such as gang interventionists and the police department. That's done. Those two are done. Phase three will begin in about 45 days, where we will bring the interventionists and the first responders from South LA and the Crenshaw area together to begin to deepen that relationship. What does that mean? It means that all fire stations are community-based fire stations. Therefore, we must be able to interact with everyone in our neighborhood as firefighters, both in emergency and non-emergency situations. Firefighters are centrally located within a 2-square-mile radius anywhere in the city. So we want to be able to take advantage of that. How does that begin? By inviting community into the firehouse,
Right.
by sitting down and having a cup of coffee and talking about how we operate and how we could best serve each other. And to the extent that we have invited the interventionists to share ride-alongs with us and really see how we respond to emergency situations. So what will come out of that? Out of that will come a specific evaluation from the fire department on what we see the benefits of that type of operation is and how we could thus improve it, and with the proper resources to be able to expand that to other communities in the city of Los Angeles, because we're operating it currently as a pilot so that we could work out all the bugs. That, in collaboration with what Chief Beck is talking about with regard to the institute that's being developed by the Advancement Project, is where the fire department will continue its focus toward not just emergency response, which is really, really critical, but we see the role of an interventionist as someone that could help us improve the efficiency and effectiveness of that service delivery, particularly when we're talking about violent incidents. So Chief Barry is very encouraged to be involved, and I've been fortunate to act as his liaison on behalf of the fire department with regard to this. But let me just say very clearly, I work very closely with Akil Bashir, and he works very closely with Chief Barry to help guide firefighters in an area that ultimately will provide for us as firefighters and the communities that we serve.
Thank you. And
Yes, sir.
One of the things that I think is inherent, but I'd rather hear you say it on the record. Now, from the police department's vantage point, what you're doing next week, what you've been doing for the last few years and the last few months, and as you described the progress that you're embarking on, and you agreed with me over the next few months, a lot of those things are going to culminate and come together now and over the next few months. The chief of your department, Chief Bratton, is fully aware and supports all of that you described today?
Absolutely. I work directly for the chief, and he and I have had many conversations about this. He knows exactly what I do.
Okay, but not only knows, but he's in full support.
Oh, no.
And obviously it takes
wouldn't do it if he
resources,
didn't.
man hours, and pulling these meetings together. The bottom line is he not only acknowledges and understands what you're doing, but he's saying, go forth and
Yes.
do it as you best feel you should, right?
Yes, I am not an independent contractor.
Okay, and then also Battalion Chief Cooper, Chief Barry, the head of the fire department, he also is fully aware of all the things you described today, and he understands and supports the efforts that you've been engaged with and you're engaging in now, and what you've described that you're going to do in the future?
Yes, sir. On this particular issue, I report directly to Chief Barry, and all that I echo is on behalf of his commitment to the extent, and I failed to mention, as a result of the students that graduated from the academy, they all receive very specific certificates from the fire chief.
He was there.
He was actually, yes, sir, at the 16-week academy graduation at the African American Firefighter Museum. He was there and also provided certificates to all of the interventionists as testimony to what they completed in their commitment to serve their communities, and then also testimony to the fire chief's commitment to remain engaged in this important issue.
Thank you.
I had just one other thing, and Councilman Reyes, I can understand your concern and your worry, but I'm incredibly optimistic. And I think that in my city service and in the 30 years I've been around this organization, and like Chief Beck, my dad was on the police department, and I do have a son on this police department. I haven't seen us move in this direction ever. And I think that if we were starting today to talk about gang intervention and the role that the police department and the fire department plays in this thing, and today is the start, I wouldn't be as optimistic. But some of the things that are now taking place have been in the works for years, for 3 or 4 years, that we definitely saw the advantages.
Talked about
to that.
for decades, but actually intensely focused work on it over the last few years.
Oh, absolutely. And Chief Beck was talking about in South Bureau alone, where we had 1,500 police officers that worked for us in South Bureau. We took on this issue 2 or 3 years, actually as much as 3 years ago, on the importance of gang intervention and the role that it plays and how it can reduce violence. A lot of what has occurred, and I think in our progress has been made about how do we continually reduce crime. Bratton came in here and said, we want you to reduce crime. It was really up to the station captains and everybody else, and Chief Beck and I at that level when we were both captains, to start beginning to think about other ways in which to further reduce crime and to reduce the effects of crime and reduce the numbers of crime and that sort of thing. You know, we all kind of get lost in some point in our careers where we just kind of felt numb to this whole process, and then we really couldn't play a role in it. But really, the chief, he pounded us to continually lower crime. And when you look at our homicide numbers and the number of shooting victims, fewer shooting victims that we have now that we had just a few years ago, when you look back in the 1992, it's incredibly low. And a lot of that has to do with our ability to interact with intervention workers and to go in places in which we weren't comfortable before, to develop those relationships. And the reason that I think it's going to work is because those relationships have already been developed, and we've gotten past that meeting that you talked to, that I've been in exactly the same meeting, where there's so much tension in the room and there's so much anger in the room, you get nothing accomplished. But what you have to do in those instances is you have to keep going. You have to have the second meeting, the third meeting, the fourth meeting, and when you get beyond that, then you've developed relationships, and now you're setting protocols. Now you're setting how you're going to put this into play and how you're going to make it all work. So we'll set the protocols without losing the relationships, and we'll maintain the relationship, not only relationships, but standardize how we do it so that everybody can learn by it. And I think with that, like Chief Beck said, when we all leave, and essentially when our kids, and for the police department side of it, begin to move up, they consider this just a normal way of doing police work, not anything unusual.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I too am the eternal optimist, but I also have these senses of what's happening around me, and what really struck me was that when my seatmate, Councilmember Jan Perry, she was sharing with me this conversation she was having with her staff. And she was essentially echoing what I was saying to my staff a few weeks before. So we were sensing the same thing. We were both deputies back in the early 90s when that happened. And when I looked at her, I said, you know what's scary, Jan, is that I just had that conversation with my staff. We just finished talking about this. And she just looked at me and said, wow, I guess we know where we've been. So, again, I don't sound like an alarmist, but I think there's such good work here.
Oh, you're right.
That I think we should amplify it when you think it's strategic, when the chair feels in cooperation with everyone else here that we need to celebrate what has been accomplished, but in such a way we can instill confidence in the everyday citizen that things are going to get better. Because right now, things that are out of our control, the economy and everything else, it's pretty bleak for thousands and thousands of people out there right now. And so I just think this is a positive to share.
Yeah, and one word that we haven't used, but I think you described it, and you caused me to actually think of it, and what we're doing today when it comes to intervention and when it comes to policing and when it comes to reducing crime, especially violent crime in our toughest neighborhoods, is we are finally creating and committed to a process of sustainability. This isn't a phase. We're not talking about in 2007 and 2008 we did that. We're talking about changing the way we do business in the city of Los Angeles. When it comes to this issue, we are creating a system of sustainability, protocols, activities, requirements, expectations of police officers, expectations of the department, interaction and communication with the fire department and many other entities within the city, third-party providers, city departments, etc., and then actually creating a system that is evolving. We already have Akil has put together a training course, what have you, that's evolving as well. But the whole idea that I think all of us talked about today is that we're all committed to making sure that when people retire, when people leave their current responsibilities of being office holders, as we have term limits in the city, et cetera, that we leave behind something that is well done, sustainable, proven, that it is actually contributing tremendously to an effective process of reducing violent crimes, murders, and also intervening and preventing future generations from engaging in that activity. So it's something that everything you described today is something about sustainability and long-term commitment. Any closing remarks from you gentlemen? Anything you want to add to the
Thank you for the
dialogue?
opportunity to speak.
Same with the fire department, sir. Councilman Cardenas, Councilmember, Reyes, thank you for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to be a part of this important issue.
Okay.
I have one thing,
Yes.
if I could, Councilman. I'd like to recognize Bill Martinez. If it wasn't for him and it wasn't for his ability to pull groups together and to help us, especially when we were in South Bureau, none of this would have occurred. His work that he's done at Cal State LA and the teaching which we have been a part of and been invited to talk to all new students that were going to get their certification on gang intervention. He has included us on that, on pieces on how to professionalize gang intervention, how to work better with us and to develop these protocols. He's been instrumental in working with us on that. So I want to make sure that I pass that along. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We've engaged more in the last few years in this city. We've engaged cross-culturally between the police department, fire department, CDD, various departments within the city, third-party providers, intervention organizations, prevention organizations, academians. We've engaged more in the last few years on this matter and culminated in what is now becoming protocols, which is now becoming academies, which is now becoming training programs. We even have a famous football coach in the city of Los Angeles who has made a tremendous commitment on this issue. My point is, I truly do believe that we are engaged right now and we're all part of a synergy that we have made tremendous progress in in the last few years, but at the same time, this synergy, I truly do believe, is going to continue for the next few years to the point where we will never be done with putting protocols into place. We will never be done with the perfect system of intervention and interoperability between all of the players. But I think that in this time that we're sitting in right now, we'll probably be able to look back in a few years and truthfully and honestly say that it was a culmination of a tremendous amount of progress where we now have solidified systems in place where unquestionably we are actually making a tremendous effect on the communities, on crime, on preventing crime, intervening, and also making a long-term impact on curtailing future generations of this, because this has been going on for generations. As Akil said earlier, the way in which it manifests itself on the street has changed quite a bit. The level of violence is much higher today than it was 20 or 30 years ago. But 20, 30 years ago, we had gangs. We had the same elements going on. But I truly do believe that we are right now in the middle of culminating in truly turning the corner on reducing the generational effects that we've seen happen in the city. So I'd like to thank all of you for your commitment of being a part of this, because you don't have to go to the lengths that you go to. I know you don't, but you do. So thank you very, very much. With that, we now open it up for public comment on item number 3. We're on item number 3. Any public comment cards? I do not have any public comment cards before me on item number 3. So with that, public comment is open on item number 3. See no one come forward on item number 3 for public comment. Public comment is closed on item number 3, and we will adopt the motion and instruct the departments to report within 45 days, a formal report as was discussed today in committee. Okay, thank you. With that, we go now back to our last item on the agenda. Thank you, sir. Item number 2. We are now back on item number 2. Mr. Reardon, we're going to have to be brief. We're going to take about 10 minutes, so I might ask you some quick questions, and Mr. Reyes may have some quick questions or clarifications he'd like from you. Please read item number 2.
Item number 2, continued from November 3rd, 2006. Motion, Cardenas, Han, Reyes, relative to the city attorney and Los Angeles Police Department to report on gang injunctions.
Okay. Can you bring us up to speed when it comes to, apart from what we already talked about in item number 1, the item that is before us relative to gang injunctions?
Yes, sir. And in fact, the break was helpful. We were able to write a list out, and we'll tick off the 7 or 8 items on the list. And my colleagues have also prepared a file that we have submitted to you, which we'd like to make part of the record. The public record, anyone can review if they want, as a response on Council File Number 08-0150-S1 and Council File Number 06-0727.
And we are on the latter at this moment.
That said, what we have done, and largely working with your staff as well for ideas and advice and counsel, we know those were coming from you as well, and your guidance over the last 6 months to a year, we have taken the city attorney's website and begun to use it as a framework for information, not just an advertisement for the city attorney's office, but something more. And you'll see on the board as Mr. Martinez ticks off the various items on, as he walks through a sort of capture of the website, you can see that what we have now on the website, and it's going to increase. And in fact, we're going to seek links with this committee as well as the city council, so that we can, you said it, sir, have a synergy, and people can get information, and they can feel like their government is working for them and with them. We have on the website English and Spanish versions of the petition for removal from a gang injunction. We also have on the website, as you can walk through it, we have information on how a gang injunction works. We have information on clear sites that we've talked about in this committee before. We have a summary of gang injunction facts. We have guidelines for the gang injunctions. We also have a link to the Los Angeles County Grand Jury Report on civil gang injunctions. And we have a description of our Taking Out Urban Gang Headquarters program, which we use across the city. What we've tried to do is make the website user-friendly. And my colleague, Ms. Tremblay, has pointed out something that was a particular pet project of mine, and I almost overlooked. We have this is something I think the council has been asking for a long time. We and Mr. Martinez and the people working with him have done a lot of work to make this happen. You can call up the maps now for the gang injunctions, the 37 safety zones. If you need, if anyone wants to look at a safety zone, they can find one. Here he is doing it right now. They can find it. It's available. The map you were talking about, Councilmember Reyes.
Right.
Now it's not something that's just in the back of a book somewhere. It can be, and now he can break it down, and you can look at the safety zone for a particular injunction that's in your district.
Great.
And more than that, we have the orders. No longer do we have to say to people, well, go to court, you can find yourself an order. And I don't mean that we said that in a rude way, but court's a hard place to go find documents. It is. It simply is. It is for lawyers, and I'm sure it is for the public, an untrained individual. Now you can go get the orders that are on the website. And I will say there are some redacted portions of those orders where names or photos of people are put on, and that's to protect privacy rights. This isn't about individual gang members. What this is, or persons who may be alleged to be gang members. What this is about, it's about information, so that people can find out if they're in a safety zone or if they're not. They can find out what the terms of the orders are in their safety zone. And that's just a start. There'll be more, but to summarize it in one thought, this is a classic example of, and I know the council has heard this from too many people over the years, there was a can't do attitude. There was it can't happen, you can't do it. There was a no attitude. And fortunately, and I want to stress this point, and I recognize it's taking an extra minute of your time, but I have to say this. You know, it's not an accident that Ms. Tremblay and Mr. Martinez are sitting next to me on either side. I mean, these are people who, you know, I hand-selected to work with. I mean, I think you know Mr. Martinez well.
I think you're a very wise man. I mean, Mr. Martinez, I'm sure you have a great team, but I know Mr. Martinez has been working with our office for many, many years, and the changes we've seen because of his spirit, his sense of commitment, no question, so I applaud you.
I'm a lucky man, and I sought out the best people, and the best people happened to create also a sense of diversity. It wasn't diversity for diversity's sake, but our division is much more diverse than it was 20 months ago. And again, as I say, that were the best people happened to be a diverse group, which is a funny way how that works out, but that is my belief, and I know it's shared by everyone here. That said, council members and the council, if you need more information on this, you can always get it. Mr. Martinez is a great link for you. Ms. Tremblay is a great link for you on this, and the process is being demonstrated. You asked us, Councilmember Cardenas, you said, hey, I've seen the San Francisco website, and it's a lot better than yours. You were right. And we looked at it with your staff, and it was. And now we think we're up to speed and maybe even beyond them, and we intend to outpace them, not in a competition, but because it's the right thing to do. And we want to get, if there's public information that we should share with the public, and if you have thoughts on that, as I know you have already, share it with us. If it can be done, it'll be done. And where there are redactions that are necessary to protect people's rights and privacies, we'll make those redactions. And I'll stress, your influence on this subject by pushing us, that allowed us to get the priority in our office. And that was important. We got to the front of the queue. That said, two more thoughts on that. That I need to point out. We have two more things that are very important. We've gotten across the city to various intervention meetings and trainings at community meetings. We've conducted over 100 LAPD trainings, I think 120.
160 in fiscal year 07-08 on the injunctions, and now the petition are a part of that.
So we're conducting trainings on a weekly or beyond, bi-weekly basis, and that's critical. That we trebled, quadrupled the number of trainings that we
Now, the
have.
petitioners being part of that is now formal.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Petition
It's not
training.
adjunct, it's formal. That's part of the process now.
Absolutely, including whether it's to Sergeant Whittle's Interventionist Academy. One of our very experienced prosecutors was invited to that, got one of those nice certificates from the fire department. So it is a regular part, both making sure that the officers understand our guidelines for enforcement, but also the petition.
That's right. I mean, and the training, and to answer that question with one further answer that even makes it more formal. And again, this is a practice, a new practice that we've talked about, and I want to put on the record publicly. When we serve, and it's service that Ms. McGill was talking about in terms of what some people say, putting someone on a list, that's actually a metaphor. There is no technical list. But what I think she was referring to was service of the injunction. Service is not a penalty, and it is not a crime when someone is served with an injunction, but we are now doing for the first time, and this was a educational process for us and for the police as well, but they stepped right up, as you've just heard over the last hour. We are serving a copy of the petition with a copy of the permanent order. When we serve the permanent gang injunction now on a going forward basis, we did this in Sanford, we did it with 204th Street, we'll do it going forward. An individual will get the petition as well. To some degree, that might only be the beginning, but it is a statement and a message that there is another way. And we can go on and on, but I know your time is brief. There is one more point for the record, and we can go over this again as the weeks and months pass. For those people, although it is absolutely true that computers are now widely available, they aren't available to all. We have, the analog approach too. We will send out petitions where they're requested. We will give them to council members or any representatives where they're requested. We will do it the old-fashioned way. And if someone has, needs help with the technical services, we can find them information technology help so they can navigate their way through the process. And we'll work with this committee to make sure that people who need help understanding what these forms are will get that too. We represent the people, and as a result, we can't create a conflict of interest by also representing someone who is on the other side of the council table, as it were. But what we can do is help that person get either representation or get to the services they need so that the system works better.
Okay, Bruce, I'd like to make a statement of interpretation that I have of what the petition removal process is. So the petition for removal from a gang injunction is an alternative to the civil court proceedings because it is a non-court process that does not require filing papers, court appearance, or legal fines, correct?
Exactly, correct.
Okay, so that process is available, and it commences with an individual who wants to engage in that petition process of filling out a few pages. And I say a few because we talked a lot about it can't be 60 pages, right, because that in and of itself would be a deterrent.
Correct.
So it's a few pages, and it's something that they can retrieve or receive where right now?
Right now, you could start with the website where you could download it or have it printed out in Spanish and English. You can get it from our office from either the 8th floor of City Hall East or the 9th floor of City Hall East. We will distribute it to council. I know your office, of course, has copies because you work so closely, but we have in the past, back in December, but we'll do it again over the next couple of weeks. We'll get it to every council office. We'll have copies distributed to the LAPD so they can get it. We also have, I believe Ms. Joseph is still here, and I've had the opportunity of to talk to her over the last couple of months. I know she's also someone that's working with this committee to help on issues of intervention and prevention. We want to get our petition to the public defenders, to counsel and services who can help. Okay. Those people who have pending cases really need to have their cases resolved. But there's a universe of other people out there who have cases behind them and don't want new cases. That's the group we're looking for.
Well, one of the things I'm going to recommend and offer my staff's help in this, I was wondering if through the city attorney, Rocky Delgadillo, if he could instruct, he would, not me, if he could please consider instructing his neighborhood prosecutors to get these petitions, a stack of them, out to each of the council offices, and also if they could start over the next, I know this is kind of a tight time frame, right, but between like tomorrow and the end of next week, if they could get a handful to the intervention and prevention organizations in their areas, the not-for-profit organizations that are serving the communities that are affected by these gang injunctions, to get a handful of them out to them, and also let them know what the website address is and/or phone number that they could call if they need other copies. Obviously, the more sophisticated the organization, they'll just jump on the computer and start printing them out themselves. I know that Rocky Delgadillo and I have made a commitment to each other that we will go out to various meetings, if we have to call the meetings ourselves.
Correct.
Of intervention and prevention organizations, and actually hand them out ourselves and look them in the eye, one as a council member, legislator for the city, and also as the elected city attorney for the city, so that we can answer their questions and allay their ideas for the pessimists
Correct.
out there that might say, yeah, right, like this is for real. It is for real. And with all due respect, today was the announcement, formal announcement, that at least one person who's petitioned to get off the gang injunction list is now formally, has completed the process and is now off of that list. So that is the first, not the last, but I would appreciate it if you could convey that to the city attorney, and perhaps over the next week or so, we can at least commence the dissemination of copies of this formally through your representatives, your gang prosecutors, neighborhood prosecutors.
Correct.
So that they can go out and touch base with the organizations they're all familiar with, and then that way, hopefully, the dialogue and the level of respect for the fact that this process is real will actually start to register in people's minds.
Yes,
and
sir.
in the
And
community.
in fact, I'll say it again, which is another symbol of how far we've come, I believe. I'll take you and raise you one again, and we'll also, I would say by Monday, 2 Mondays from now, so 10 days, if I may, have that, if that's enough time. If that's not
That'd
too
be
much.
great. Perfect.
Within 10 days, we'll also have distributed to our school safety prosecutors. We'll double
Excellent.
it. Because Mr. Delgadillo has created a division, as you know, but for the record, has created a division that has called the Safe Schools Division, that brings together the disparate parts of the office of prosecutors who worked mostly, or at least largely, in prevention and intervention, and put them together, what we call the Safe Schools Division. Those are also the folks who are the reviewing authority for the petition. They're not
Excellent.
gang prosecutors, and that's critical. They're experienced people, they're knowledgeable people, but they don't wear the gang prosecutor hat, and that also reduces
That
the
would
conflict.
be great to see that happen, especially if it could happen between this next Monday and the following Monday, over
That'll
the
happen.
next 10 days. Thank you very much, and I'm sure you, before you made that commitment, you went through your mind and you understand that it's achievable. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
So with that, what my office is going to do, they're going to forward to the city attorney's office through you, Bruce, a list of 5 questions that we weren't able to get to today. If you could please respond to my committee or me as the chairman, and then I will disseminate it out to the members of this committee, the top 5 questions that we had about this process that we just discussed.
Yes, sir, we'd be glad to.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. With that, is there anybody here to speak on item number 2? We're on item number 2. Public comment on item number 2 is now open. Seeing and hearing no one come forward for public comment on item number 2. Public comment on item number 2 is now closed. With that, we'll note and file this report. Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Councilmember Reyes. General public comment is now open. Is there anybody here for general public comment? Anybody like to make general public comment to this committee, as it is now open for general public comment? Seeing and hearing none, general public comment is now closed. Therefore, this committee is now adjourned. Thank you.